Good morning, family. This is David with Table Talk, and my beautiful wife is with me this morning. Man, God just really is stirring in our spirits and, teaching us more and more every day. I had an opportunity to teach some men last night on We're Never Too Far Gone for the love of Jesus. And God just keeps pouring into that communication. We talked about it on last Table Talk, just kind of discussed Peter and how Peter denied Jesus, how they fell asleep in the Garden of Gethsemane, how Peter denied Jesus and went back home and got home. And I love this because it's John 21. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and on this wise he showed himself. There were together with Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee and the sons of Zebedee and two other disciples with him. Simon Peter said unto them, I'm going fishing. They said unto him, we'll all go with you. Man, one of the powerful things that God gave me from that was when we have surrounded ourselves with individuals who have our best interests in mind. They know when we're hurting. They know when we're self-destructive. They know when we have the desire to self-medicate. They know because they're intimately connected. And Peter had distanced himself so greatly from within himself from where he had come from. Understand this, my wife and I were talking about it this morning, how Peter is mending his net at the shores with some other brothers, and Jesus comes along and tells them to follow him, and he follows them. And it's never been communicated in my sphere, but we were talking about how Peter had a wife. And we know that because when Jesus comes back in some more chapters, Jesus comes back to Peter's house and heals his mother-in-law. And so Peter had a wife. Peter had other things going on. And Jesus said, come follow me. Peter left everything. It says they left everything and they followed Jesus. He followed Jesus through healings. He followed Jesus through people being raised from the dead. He followed Jesus through people getting their eyesight, their hearing. He followed Jesus to a point to where there's a brother who's paralyzed and some men rip off a roof where Jesus is preaching and they lower this disabled brother down in front of Jesus. And when they do, Peter's in the room. When they lower him down there, Jesus looks up and says, hey, by your faith, he's healed. And so Peter is amongst all of this. Peter is the one who gets in Jesus's face about the fact that Jesus says, I'm going to die and I'm going to be resurrected. Peter said, no, no, no. See, the enemy ain't got no power. And so Jesus just had to rebuke the spirit in Peter because it was the spirit of fear. It was the spirit of the enemy trying to sow discourse amongst the men. And so Peter got squared away right there. And then Jesus tells Peter that he's going to deny him. Peter says, no way I'm going to deny you. And so many times that's us. So many times in that atmosphere, in that conversation, in that boardroom, in that area where we refuse to stand up for what we believe. And that doesn't mean I have to stand up and shout it from the rooftop. Sometimes it just means I have to walk out. Sometimes it means I just have to say what God tells me to say. But being discerning and listening to what God has to tell me, that's the time, right? So Peter tells Jesus, no, I'm not going to deny you. And when it came time, Peter staying away from where Jesus is being led into judgment hall and the next beatings and everything that he was going to encounter. And Peter does deny him, and Peter runs away. And now Jesus has shown himself. But here's what's really cool. Peter decides, hey man, I just need to go back home. And sometimes we need to go back and collect ourselves. But we have to be careful because going back sometimes is going back to the familiar. Sometimes it's getting back in an atmosphere where I'm comfortable. Sometimes it's remember, comfort is not always the best thing. Getting back to where I'm comfortable often leads back to habits that I'm comfortable with, back to people that I'm comfortable with, back to atmospheres that I'm comfortable with. And those don't always agree with my purpose and God's plan. So Peter goes back home and he's at home. But what I love is the brothers don't leave his side. They know he's hurting. The author of this book, John, he's there. He's called the beloved one. He's called the one that Jesus loved, the one that reclined back in Jesus' chest and said, no matter what, I'm right here, And so there Peter is, and he decides he's going to go fishing, and the brothers say, hey, we're going to go fishing with you. But in the morning, verse 4, but in the morning now came Jesus, and he stood on the shores. But the disciples knew not that it was him, and it was Jesus. And then he said unto them, children, now Jesus is taken on, because he's now died and been resurrected. He's now taken on the paternal design of his character, because initially it was brothers, because, hey, I'm Jesus, I'm walking with you, we're brothers, we're going to do this together. Now he's taking on that paternal, that father role of saying, children, men, young men, boys, hey, listen, They answered him when he said, have you caught any meat yet? Have you caught anything yet? And they said, no, we ain't caught no fish, we caught nothing. And he said, cast your net on the other side of the boat. Something should have registered there because it was Jesus who'd done this before, and they caught so many fish that their nets broke trying to pull them in, trying to haul them in, right? And when he told them to cast the net there, they therefore cast the net, and now they were able to draw it for a multitude of fish. They weren't able to draw it for a multitude of fish. Therefore, the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. Now, when Simon Peter recognized that it was the Lord, he girded himself, he put his clothes on, he jumped on, for he was naked. Understand this. The terminology and communication, he was naked. In other words, he was finally in a place where he needed to be. And that naked is identified as in when all you can see on you is the mess on you, when all you can feel in you is the mess in you, and Jesus looks through all of that. He sees you just the way you are. He sees you minus the drug addiction. He sees you minus the affairs. He sees you minus the alcoholism. He sees you minus the bad habits and things that we created or designed and fallen into. He sees us beyond those things. And he saw Peter beyond that. So it's written and it's understood to me that Jesus saw him just the way he was. While you're struggling with trying to be someone for the kingdom, Jesus says, come as you are. Just the way you are, because I'm going to take you that way. Peter throws on a coat. He swims to the shore, and he comes to the shore, and they bring in the fish. I love this. So Jesus said unto them, bring in the fish which you have now caught. Wait, I love this even more. And the other disciples came in a little boat, for they were not far from land. But as they were about 200 cubits, dragging the net with fish, the net did not break. The first net was breaking for the catch. They had to have help in the first catch. And this one, it wasn't, and it was full of fish because this would be the last time that Peter fished. There wasn't one that got away. Love that. There wasn't one that got away. There wasn't a person to go, Peter, if you'd have stayed on the boat with us, we'd have got all the fish. There wasn't that. See, there wasn't going to be this person who told Peter what he messed up. Told Peter what got away. This was a full catch. And Jesus even said, hey, bring some of those fish that you caught now. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to the land full of great fish, and 133, love that, 33. And there were so many, yet was the net not broken. And Jesus said to them, come and dine with me. I love this because the Lord prepares a table for us. And he's telling us the things that we're looking at as unfinished business is finished. He wants us to come to his presence because he wants to do something greater with us than what we're dragging behind us. Again, when they're done with this catch, an entire village most likely now gets to take part in what they've just now caught. But God uses that. God blesses us with things, not so we have things and stuff. God blesses us with things because there are people who are in need. Prayer, discernment, we know who to give it to, where to go with it. But God is calling us to a greater relationship with him. He's calling us because Peter goes from here to the book of Acts, and some amazing things happen there. And you have to read it and follow Peter and just see what God did there, because you're not any further away from God than Peter was. And Peter stood in his presence. And when Peter ran away and went back home, Jesus still pursued him. That's how much he loves us. Peter denied Jesus. Peter cut a man's ear off. Peter pretty much cussed Jesus when he told him he was going to die. And he still came and pursued him. There is nothing that you have done that won't make Jesus come and pursue you. So if you've run home, pray for friends to come around you. Gird yourself with other men and women who have the character of Christ, who want his best for you. Those brothers were there because they knew their brother was hurting. And when John spots Jesus on the shore, he doesn't tell everybody else. He goes to Peter and he says, Peter, you know that brokenness in you? You know that heart in you that stopped beating for a minute? You know that hole in your chest that you can't quite feel with anything else? You know when you were cussing at that barrel and that old nature was coming back to the surface? You know all that problem? Jesus is right there. He still came for you. And I'm here to tell you today that he's right there and he still came for you. All he's asking for is all of you. Lovest thou me more than these, he says to Peter. Peter says, yes, Lord. He said, feed my sheep. Lovest thou me more than these, he says to Peter. Peter said, Lord, you know I love you. He said, then feed my sheep. At the end of the day, all God wants from us is all of us. He has a purpose for our lives, and he's going to use us to change the world. Don't be afraid of change, kingdom change. Don't be afraid to be uncomfortable, because God's going to take you to new shores. He's going to do new things with you. It's a new season. Thank you for joining us for Table Talk this morning. May God bless you and keep you, and may he find you being a fisher of men.